Hello, nerds! Nerds for Yang. We have a campaign update. I know we've been doing some policy deep dives, but you guys really love these campaign updates, so that's what we've got coming up. Let's just jump right into it. Polls, Twitter, media coverage, and betting odds. No BS. We have work to do. On polls, we're still really hovering around 1%. You know, I think in some state polls you might see a little bit higher, but for the most part, we're in the 1% range. Now, and a lot of people are going to say, yeah, you know, the polls don't represent what's actually going to happen. They're calling the wrong people. I've talked about this in past videos. I think there's some truth to that in terms of polls not being perfectly accurate, but you also have to keep it real. Like, these are scientifically done by The Economist and CNN and The Hill and Harris and Monmouth, professional polling organizations that staff full-time statisticians. It's not just calling landlines. And when you look at previous elections, the polls have held up. So, who is doing well in the polls? Well, it's basically Biden, Sanders, Warren. You know, those are like your big three, and then you've got your next tier, which is Harris, Booty, and then everybody else. And our man is in the everybody else category. Twitter, on the one hand, if you compare yourself to Beto and Castro at Yang's current rate of growth, we will exceed them. And, you know, our growth is accelerating in terms of the Yang gang, and Beto and Castro are not growing quite as fast. However, if you compare us to Booty and Harris and Warren, we are not growing as fast as them on Twitter in terms of acquiring new followers. Now, some people are going to say, well, you know, there's a lot of tweet bots and things like that. That's true. You know, again, like, you could always convince yourself that bad data, not capturing the fullness of your story, which is probably true. But I also think if the polls were really pro-Yang and the Twitter numbers were really pro-Yang, I think a lot of us would not necessarily discount it as much as we're discounting maybe bad news. So, look, it's early. It's June of 2019. The election is more than a year away. A lot's going to happen. But if you were thinking, wow, this rocket ship is already taking off, the answer is no. This is going to be a slog. And, you know, maybe it should be. I mean, he's running for president. He's starting from no name recognition, and he's got a lot of work to do. Speaking of getting more work done and getting more recognition, I will say that mainstream media seems to be continuing to give Yang coverage. You've got Bloomberg, Time, who was just on the Bill Maher show. Vice News did a video about him, so that's really encouraging. So I have to say kudos again to the press team at the campaign. I know those things don't just happen by themselves. And then betting odds. Betting odds, you'll see basically Biden is where the money's at in terms of what people think are going to do really well. You also see that Sanders is on a little bit of a downward trajectory, probably losing mostly to Biden. And then you also see the bettors have really warmed up to Booty. He's this purple line here. And, you know, a lot of us were wondering, like, well, Buttigieg, like, he's a mayor of a very, very small town. He's really, really young. Maybe he's just sort of like a Beto, you know, like 1 week on Vanity Fair and then he'll go away. No, Booty is not going away. Booty keeps growing. And I think I saw some recent press interviews with him. And I have to admit, he does handle himself well. He's a smart guy. So we're going to have to figure out how to stand out in a pretty competitive field. The other thing that's interesting is if you look at Warren is pretty stable, but I think Harris is still pretty strong. And maybe the last thing I'd call out from the betting odds point of view is O'Rourke is that light blue line. And I mean, obviously he used to be one of the juggernauts, you know, almost 20% probability of winning the primary. And now he's probably down to like 3 or 4%. And I was hoping that Yang would surpass him, but now they're kind of neck and neck in this like 4% probability of winning the primary. I think Beto's restart of his campaign has helped stem the bleeding. And, you know, Yang is this kind of reddish magenta maybe, I don't know, this reddish looking line here, and you see like it's pretty flat. There was a little bit of a kind of upward movement in around May, but we've got work to do. I think a lot of us are hoping for the debates to be the breakout moment. Before that, we were hoping it was a CNN town hall. But maybe the debates will be a big turning point. There's another potential outcome, which is there won't be one huge hockey stick moment, but it's really going to be this long, hard slog. And over time, we'll just keep kind of going rung by rung. And we've got time to do that. And maybe that's the way to do it. Here's a deeper dive into the polling over time for the last 3 months. And here you can see pretty clearly Biden's the green. You get this nice bump for Biden around May, and then sort of the honeymoon period starts ending at the end of May. And that's when Bernie kind of recaptures a little bit of his mojo. And again, here you have Yang. In this case, he's stuck in this like bottom clump. And so that's kind of where we are. We're around that 1% mark, and we obviously need to break out. Actually, when you look at and zoom out at this 3-month view, it's basically Biden and Bernie and everyone else. Because yes, technically Warren and Harris and Booty are in kind of this mid-single digit area, and you could say that's tier 2. But when you look at this kind of zoomed out, it's clear you've got the 2 leaders and a clump. And yeah, Yang is at the bottom of that clump. He's not at the very bottom. I think Gillibrand, Bullock, Delaney, Williamson, Ryan, Inslee, Bennett, Gabbard, Hickenlooper, they all wish they would be as high as Yang. But so Yang's kind of in the middle of the clump, but that's kind of where we're at. Now, I was kind of curious about what's going on behind these numbers, particularly because a lot of people say, well, it's just like people don't know about Yang, but everybody that knows about him loves him. So on June 6th, The Economist and YouGov published their latest poll. And usually, like, when we quote these numbers, we're like, Yang's at 1%. Well, that's like one of literally hundreds of questions that they ask. So if you go to the sources, they will actually publish a lot of the data. So I took some of it, and being a nerd for Yang, and just nerd in general, I put it into a spreadsheet and made a bar chart. The blue line here is awareness. So what percent of Americans, and this, I think they surveyed 1,500 people across the country, both Democrats and Republicans. What percent of Americans are aware of each candidate? That's the blue line. And then of those who are aware, what percent are very favorable? Not just somewhat favorable or below, but very favorable. Sort of like the top level of interest. And what you see here is that in terms of awareness, our man Yang is actually 40%. He's the lowest of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Of these 12 candidates, he's the lowest in awareness, which makes sense, because Biden, he was a vice president, Warren, senator, Bernie, former presidential candidate, Booty's just killing it with the media, and they keep booking him, and he keeps delivering. So I know a lot of people say, well, media is just in love with Booty, but if you watch his interviews, he handles it pretty well. He's not super specific, but he's very eloquent and articulate and smart. Harris, obviously senator, Booker, senator, Castro, former Obama administration cabinet member, Beto's kind of like Booty. Just media loved him. Klobuchar's in Congress. And then you got Yang. So Yang, you could argue 2 things. One is you're like, ooh, we only have 40% awareness. Once we get to 80% awareness like Biden, things will completely change. I will balance that optimism with a little bit of devil's advocate, and that's the red bar. So what the red bar measures is of those who are aware, how many are very favorable. So what I did was I took the very favorable number and divided it by the am at least aware of this candidate number. Actually took 1 minus the people who were unaware, but same difference. And here you see, of those who are aware, people love Biden and Warren and Bernie. I mean, well, not love, but 1 out of every 4 are very, very favorable. So if they know about Biden, 1 out of 4 are very, very favorable. If they know about Yang, only 1 out of 8 are very favorable. And so that kind of shatters this myth that everyone who knows about Yang loves Yang. There now are a lot of people who know about him and they don't like him. And so that's kind of interesting. Why do we have of those who are aware not sort of instant love the way, many of us do? I have a couple theories. One is I think he's being potentially positioned and framed as the give money away candidate, which is very different than the negative income tax candidate or the freedom dividend candidate or the candidate for, helping working class people transition through a tough economic transformation. It's very easy to just say, oh, he's a socialist. He literally wants to give money away. And then the second thing is potentially him being positioned as a joke candidate. I know a lot of people keep asking him about his position on circumcision, and maybe some people talk about, you want to have paid marital counseling. And so, in short, if you were thinking, oh, everyone who knows about Yang loves him, I think the correct statement is everyone that you follow on Twitter and maybe watch on YouTube that knows him, like many of us love him. But there is a significant population that now know about him, and they've made the call, not for me. And that's something we need to really work on. To be more constructive, I think trying to position Yang a little bit more holistically and maybe focusing less on UBI and the freedom dividend and more on Yang as a pragmatic, data-driven problem solver, a businessman, a nonpartisan, practical guy that wants to solve problems for the country. That's harder to distill into a bumper sticker. Well, maybe math is one of them, but even math, I don't know, math, I like it. Maybe not everybody that appeals to everybody, so maybe it's reason, the revolution of reason, who knows. TLDR. Good news is there's a lot of people who have never heard of Yang, so that's opportunity. Bad news is a lot of people that have heard of Yang, of those who have, of the 60% who have, only 13% of those are currently favorable. Next, since this was such interesting data, I want to dig in a little more to where is the Yang favorability coming from. And what you see here is that he's most favorable with young people, age 18 to 29, and he's most unfavorable with older people, 65 and plus. So 19% of people who are 65 and older had an unfavorable view of him. Now you got to keep in mind, only 40% even knew who he was. So half of the 65 and older people who know who he is had an unfavorable view of him. So that's a serious gap that needs to be closed. The other thing is 68% of females, no idea who he is. So he's got like a male-female imbalance, and then you've got a old-young imbalance. There is some interesting and good news here, which is he does really well with non-whites, Black, Hispanic, and other. Almost 10% of Black, Hispanic, and other have a very favorable view of him. Secondly, people who earn more than $100,000 have a very favorable view of him. Also, with respect to awareness and party ID, get this, more Republicans are aware of Andrew Yang than Democrats. 62% of Democrats have no idea who Andrew Yang is. So now you could get into like our favorite debate on Twitter, which is like, why is MSNBC refusing to give Yang commensurate coverage to other Democratic candidates? There have been examples where they'll highlight all, quote unquote, all of the contenders, and they'll list a bunch of people who are polling less, raising less, not even qualified for the primary debates on that screen, and then Yang will be gone. And then there's this whole Twitter hashtag, where's Andrew, where's Yang? So there could be something there about at least the news sources that Democrats are consuming do not seem to be covering Yang as much as the news sources that Republicans are consuming. And I think that's pretty much true. If you looked at all of the times that Fox News has agreed to put Yang on, it's pretty impressive. Now, in fairness, they don't always give Yang a fair shot. So he was on Fox News, and I'll put a link to the video below where they kind of break down one of the interviews with him, and you'll see how it's not super fair. It's a little bit dismissive, and it's almost like, oh, look at this silly Democrat. On the other hand, I think Andrew is such a great interviewee, it's still worth it for him to take those interviews and try and turn it around. And that's perhaps why the Republican very unfavorable rate is pretty high, high-ish. It's 24%. I don't know. You could argue it's not surprising that they have a very unfavorable view of a Democratic candidate, but that's what it is. I will say that 5% of Republicans have a very favorable view, which is consistent with the total population to have a favorable view. In fact, there are almost as many Trump voters who have a favorable view of Andrew Yang as there are Clinton voters who have a favorable view of Andrew Yang. So TLDR is big gap with older people, nice strong support with non-whites, which will be very important in the primaries, but then a weird kind of lack of awareness within the Democratic Party relative to the Republican Party. Next, I figured, oh God, this video is taking long. Let's maybe make this part 2. Okay, so if you want to see the next part of this video, make sure you subscribe. You'll get a notification. I'll probably publish part 2 in a few days after you see this one. Maybe sooner, depends on how long it takes to edit. Hopefully this update was useful to you. Please, if it was, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think on how we can help Yang succeed even more. Like it, share it, do all that good stuff, because these videos for this channel have now reached 45,000 different people, and hopefully we can get to 100,000 people that have seen the videos. We have 3,000 hardcore subscribers. We'd love to boost that too. And so thanks, and let's get this one over the line by working hard, by being a team, and by doing everything we can to spread the word. So tell all your friends, not just on Twitter, but do it on Facebook. I know sometimes we don't want to get political on Facebook. I think it's time to help spread the word. If you know any women, please talk to them about Yang. If you know any seniors, please talk to them about Yang. And if you're a senior, here's my pitch to seniors. You're collecting Social Security. Would an extra $1,000 a month be meaningful? And if you're worried about I don't know if that's fair, we are a $20 trillion economy. The cost of the Freedom Dividend will probably be around $1 trillion when you take out already existing giving programs. Is it worth 5% of our economy for every citizen to get $1,000 a month? I think so. And do you think we could pay for that if we captured more of the upside from this economy that's growing and growing and growing, but all the money keeps going to the top 1%? Is $1,000 a month worth it for a senior citizen? I think so. I think it'd be very meaningful, and hopefully you will too. So we'll see you next time. In the meantime, keep it real.